Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
I'm Amy Nicholson, the film critic for the LA Times.
And I'm Paul Scheer, an actor, writer, and director. You might know me from The League, Veep, or my non-eligible for Academy Award role in Twisters.
We love movies, and we come at them from different perspectives.
Yeah, like Amy thinks that, Joe Pesci was miscast in Goodfellas, and I don't.
He's too old. Let's not forget that Paul thinks that Dune 2 is overrated.
It is.
Anyway, despite this, we come together to host Unspooled, a podcast where we talk about good movies, critical hits,
fan favorites, must-sees, and in case you missed them.
We're talking Parasite to Home Alone.
From Grease to The Dark Knight.
We've done deep dives on popcorn flicks. We've talked about why Independence Day deserves a second look.
And we've talked about horror movies, some that you've never even heard of, like Ganja and Hess.
So if you love movies like we do, come along on our cinematic adventure.
Listen to Unspooled wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to hit the follow button.
Hello and welcome back to Extended Play, which is, as you probably know by now, a feature series where we and you get to spend a whole month talking about games.
And this is episode 3.
This is episode 3. We've already chatted quite a lot about Deus Ex Human Revolution. Just to reiterate, this will probably have spoilers.
Should we introduce ourselves?
We should introduce ourselves.
I'm Daniel Krupa.
I'm Keza MacDonald, UK Games Editor. And very excitingly this week we are joined by James Swallow.
Hello.
Who was one of the writers on Deus Ex Human Revolution.
That's right, I was one of the external game writers.
Excellent.
That's my official title.
So you were part of the collective that brought Deus Ex into
I was indeed.
into being.
I think they were over the 4-year lifespan of the title. I think we had 9 different writers working on the project at different stages for different amounts of time. But I was pretty much there, I'd say, about 90% of the time.
90%
throughout
of the
the
time.
entire project.
That's 9 writers. That's actually quite a small group for a game, isn't it?
Well, it depends on the kind of game you're talking about. I mean, Deus Ex had a lot of different elements, a lot of different strata of writing, from the core storyline to the on street barks when you meet people, and the sort of side quest material and all the backstory. So there was a lot of different tasks that were spread out between a lot of different writers, and some of them weren't there for the full duration of the project. Some left, and other guys came in. So that's why.
So last week we talked about your feedback on Deus Ex, and the week before we talked about how we were getting on, just in general with the game. Thanks again for your amazingly voluminous and very intelligent responses.
Very erudite our readers.
Yes, very erudite readers.
Apart from the trolls.
Apart from them. But no, everyone ignores them, right?
Yeah.
It's all good. But yeah, we've been talking a lot about Deus Ex narrative, so it's a particular pleasure to have one of the writers with us to chat about that as well.
And it's a pleasure to chat about it. Well, I'm very enthusiastic about it, and very invested in what was. I've said this a lot, and it makes me sound like I'm kind of like on the happy juice going, oh yeah, everything was really cool. But this really was one of the best projects I've ever worked on. I've been a games writer for 10 years now, and this is it was a great gig because it was not only a cool team of people and a fun place to work, but it's one of the few projects I've worked on where story has been well and truly respected, where I really felt like writers actually had a proper voice in the room as opposed to being somebody who is kind of a bit at arm's length.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about the actual process of writing? Like, how is the work divided up between the 9 writers? How did the writers kind of organise their labour?
Well, the thing is people say to me sometimes, oh, you're a games writer, what does that mean? And it's not the same as saying, like, say, I'm a playwright or I'm a comic book writer, it's where it's just kind of one job that you're doing. Games writer is a very, very broad church. There's a lot of different things that you can fit under that umbrella title. You can talk about narrative design, which is just the idea of coming up with the core concept and being the person who sort of like, understands and holds the whole story in their head during the duration of the project. That was the job that Mary DeMarle did on Deus Ex Human Revolution. Then you have, let's see, you got, just writing the script for cutscenes. That's one kind of job. Coming up with world building and backstory for characters and environments and factions. That's another kind of writing job. That's almost like invisible writing, because coming up with reams and reams of story about a character, where they came from, and stuff that may never actually appear in the game, but is done there for the art or the design guys to get a feel for the characters. Then you have, in-game dialogue. And then perhaps you'll have just barks, which is the kind of, bumping into people on the street and having 2 or 3 lines of dialogue from them. You'll have in-game text. So if you're reading a logbook or you're looking at the ebooks like we have in Deus Ex, there's all the text to be written there.
So it's a vast undertaking.
Absolutely, and that's just scratching the surface. And there's loads of other little small jobs here and there that even stuff like when you call up your HUD and you're looking at the text that describes a particular item, someone has to write that as well. Even down to writing the manual. If you want to write a manual that kind of feels like an artifact from in the world. All of these jobs have to be done by writers. Sometimes they're done by the same writer, but on a larger project, they're spread out amongst a group of different people.
So a lot of the stuff that we've been discussing and that our readers have thought as well is that one of the best things, the most successful aspects of Deus Ex Human Revolution is the almost invisible writing, the environmental stuff. The fact that things that are there for you to discover, but not forced down your throats. Was this a very conscious writing decision for Deus Ex? That was all environmental? Very
much so. I think I always talk about environmental storytelling when I discuss the power of games as a storytelling medium. The great thing that games can do better than movies, TV, or any other sort of form of storytelling is environmental storytelling, is having the world tell you a story, set the scene for you without actually having someone come up to you and say, well, this is the far future and this is going on and we're living in an oppressive society. Rather than having someone info dump, you can have the structure and the nature and the design of the world tell you the story just by the things that you see around you.
That's what we call environmental narrative.
Environmental narrative.
We had a reader called Louis Medina, or Lewis, possibly Medina. Sorry if I got your name wrong there, Louis or Lewis. Who says that it becomes very easy to get lost in the story and miss a lot of information. And to get the most out of the game, you have to read, not skim, but actually read emails and pocket secretaries and ebooks, as well as listen to conversations. He says he likes this approach because the game doesn't force the story down your throat, and like in real-world settings, conspiracies are hidden from sight in emails that shouldn't exist and documents that should never have surfaced. Absolutely.
I mean, Deus Ex Human Revolution rewards you if you look in every box, if you read every email, if you hack every computer, because there's a lot of density in there and there's lots of layers of story. And, and if you dig down and you mine for them, you'll find a deeper, richer experience than if you just kind of cruise across the top of the surface of it. But the option is there, if you're the kind of person who doesn't really want to spend all the time and go in every nook and cranny, then you can just play the game straight through. But I think the design of the game encourages you to really give yourself to the world and just invest as tightly in it as you can.
Do you have to plan the narrative in a way that if people don't sort of immerse themselves in that world, that it still works for them?
Well,
do you always have that person in mind who might not read every
to a degree,
ebook?
obviously, thing is you can't build a game that everybody's going to like. So there's going to be a point where somebody who perhaps is just breezing through the game and happily blowing stuff up, if that's their idea of fun, they're not going to want to engage with the core narrative of the story. And if that person's playing Deus Ex, they probably won't get as rich an experience out of it as the person who invests fully. And I think that's kind of clear from the kind of game that it is. If your idea of a good time is playing kind of, Call of Duty and you like that kind of fast-paced, action-paced story, not I'm denigrating those games at all because I love those games too. That's not the experience you'll get from Deus Ex. And if you're looking for that experience in the game, you probably aren't going to find it.
I think we've figured something out over the weeks we've been talking about Deus Ex. Like our editor-in-chief, Alex, who's not on this podcast, but he's very much a shooter. He enjoys shooting things, and he also doesn't have all that much time to play games. And he's finding Deus Ex, I think, a little bit harder to get on with than like I am or Daniel is, because we've got more time to kind of subsume ourselves. Actually,
we have been subsumed.
We have been subsumed by Deus Ex.
I think Alex is just on the edge still, and he's playing it as a straightforward shooter, and he hasn't had the time to go around and scour the world and find emails and really sort of integrate himself into Deus Ex.
Yeah, and it is about buying in. I think we've talked about this before. Right? It's about buying in. If you don't actually buy into Deus Ex, then it's not that amazing a game. It's still very good and it's still very polished. But I think if you don't properly buy in, you don't get the real kind of world-changing wow out of it that you do. Yeah,
you absolutely do. You need to buy the e-ticket and hold your nose, jump into the whole thing, because that's the nature of the game. It's a dense, story-driven game world. If you don't pick up and commit yourself to it, then you're just not going to enjoy it as much.
This sounds so pretentious, but Roland Barthes talks about readerly and writerly text, and I can never remember which one's which, but one is a kind of text that repays the investment that you give it. And Deus Ex is that kind of game.
That's exactly what we were trying to aim for. We wanted to create something that would say that if, the deal we make with the player is, you give us your time, you give us your intention, and we'll do our very best to give you a rewarding, deep experience.
It's not a spoon-feeding narrative.
No, absolutely not. And that was something I remember very early on saying, let's not spoon feed people. So, if you miss stuff, hard luck, you missed it.
Absolutely.
Just because one person, didn't find a particular email and so they're like, well, that part of the story didn't make sense to me. It's like, well, you should have looked harder. And I don't think it's fair on the other players who do invest all that time and energy to kind of constantly keep battering you over the head with story elements. This is something I've seen in a lot of games. Is there seems to be it's almost a sense that we're not trusting our players to be smart enough to pick up all the stuff. It's like, there's an event taking place in a game, so you'll be going through the game and someone will say, okay, this thing is happening. You have to, go to the castle and rescue the princess. And then you travel a little further and you meet someone and go, did you know you have to go to the castle and rescue the princess? And then you travel a little further. The princess, she's in the castle. She could really do with rescuing. It's like, do you have to keep beating me over the head with it? I heard you the first time.
Absolutely hits the nail on the head about why I love Deus Ex. It doesn't think I'm stupid. I really, really like that. I mean, even games that I've loved dearly, like Red Dead Redemption, just so often, you just be wandering around and it'll be like, press Y to get on your horse, in case you've forgotten. It's like, yeah, I know. I've been playing this game for 35 hours. I know that I have to press Y to get on my horse.
Every time you want to skin an animal. It's the same button. Same button as last time.
Same button, yeah. I mean, in a way that's good because it does remind people of people who don't have the time what they're doing and how to do it. But equally, I think the whole point of games for me is to get properly lost in them.
Absolutely.
And Deus Ex is definitely that kind of game. I think if you don't have the time, you probably can't enjoy it as much.
Well, I think to almost augment that kind of experience. We've
that's what you said there.
So I didn't even think about that. I was naturally punning, and you turned off all the objective highlighting, and just to really kind of immerse yourself even more within Deus Ex.
Yeah, that's right. Again, it gave us a choice. I did actually turn the object highlighting back on at some point because I needed to get through the game, and it was getting to the point where I was spending so much time just pootling about reading strangers' emails that I was like, okay, I actually do need to know where I'm supposed to go now. I also have a hilariously bad sense of direction, which I've mentioned before in our podcast.
See, I don't have I understand that some people felt like the objective highlighting was something that ruined immersion. I think that's a fair point to make. That's why we made it optional for people who don't. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. It's not like we're forcing it down your throats. Me, I looked at it and thought, well, my character, my vision is augmented, so.
That makes sense
to me. It makes sense in the narrative of the world. It makes sense that I would be able to look at an object and it would be highlighted to me. But it's up to the player to choose if they want to do that or not. And doing it one way or the other isn't going to ruin the flow of the game. It's up to you what your play style allows you to map your character onto Adam Jensen and what it is he does as he progresses through the story.
Even Terminator could highlight things, couldn't he, when he looked at stuff?
Yes, could evaluate.
And he's an old robot.
And that was like 84.
So yeah, talking about Jensen really briefly, that's something that's come up quite a lot in our feedback, is quite a few people don't get on with Jensen.
Why can't you like Adam? He never asked for that.
You did the voice.
Kidding.
Yeah, there seems to be a bit of a tension between Adam, the character, and then what you do as a player. And I think this is kind of unavoidable in games sometimes. But for instance, my friend Martin was talking to me. He said that he as a player, is a kind of weird, moody kleptomaniac who breaks into people's houses, reads strangers' emails, and then just kills anybody who sees him. And then Jensen's like quite an upstanding chap, and he felt that didn't gel. The way I play actually gels quite well with Adam, because I'm a kind of slightly violent pacifist, if that makes sense. I'm a pacifist who really, really loves stun guns.
Yeah, that's kind of how I played through it as well.
Yeah?
Yeah, one of the things about lead characters in games, this is a great subject to talk about as well, is they talk about the Barbie doll effect, is that when Mattel made Barbie, years and years ago, I think it's like in the 70s or the 80s, they were approached by a cartoon company and they said, we want to make a Barbie cartoon series. And Mattel said, no, that can never happen because Barbie can't be allowed to speak. I mean, I know they went on later on and they made Barbie cartoons, but at this point they said the reason we don't want Barbie to talk is because Barbie is an empty vessel that every little girl who buys that doll pours themselves into. So the little girl who owns Barbie, she's the voice of Barbie. And you can see the similar effect in video game characters. You look at Gordon Freeman from Half-Life, and you look at, I can't remember, was it the first guy in GTA 4? Was it Tony Vassetti? Or was that the second game?
GTA 4.
GTA 4.
What, Nico?
No, I'm not GTA 4. I'm thinking of Grand Theft Auto 3.
San Andreas or Vice City?
No, before
3.
Before San Andreas.
Before either of those. I can't remember.
The character in that one didn't have any dialogue either. And when you have the empty vessel, you as the player will occasionally find yourself kind of like, supplying the impetus and the emotion of that character. And so characters will talk to you, but you won't talk back to them. But the moment you give a character a voice and a persona, that character starts to overwrite you as the player's character. So you can find yourself, you must have had this happen to you when you've been playing a game and you get into a circumstance and the character says, well, I'm going to do this thing. And you think, well, I wouldn't do that thing in that circumstance. But it's that character doing it, it's not you. And this is the dynamic tension you get in games about having, do you have an empty vessel character like Gordon Freeman? Everything you learn about Gordon is stuff that's told to you by the reaction that other people have to you as a person. But Gordon himself is pretty much a kind of tabula rasa for you to play as you want. With Adam, we couldn't really do that because we need to have a strong core storyline that draws him through the narrative about his personal quest. So what we tried to do was design a lot of backstory and a lot of narrative about who Adam was, but not who he is. So when you pick him up at the beginning of the game, we say, here's the guy he was. This is all the things that informed him up to this point. Now you take over and you decide where he goes from now. There are some places where, we kind of nudge you in a different direction here or there, but we try to make the play style that you put out, we try to make that work. So if you want to play as Mary DeMarco used to talk about the arsehole Adam, if you want to be that guy kicking indoors and stabbing people, beating up old ladies, then you can do that. And we tried to make, as much as we possibly could, the narrative and the cutscenes in those moments reflect, or at least be open enough that you could apply any of those extremes to it. It's very difficult to do because you can't write a different cutscene for everybody's different kind of play style. So there's always going to be perhaps a little bit of a disconnect. And if you make it too broad, then there's no character to it at all. So there's kind of there's a little bit of hit and miss you have to make in that kind of thing. You can't always go one way or the other. You have to try and pick the sweet path that works as much as possible.
That does make sense. I wouldn't say that Deus Ex fails in this respect at all, because I think even if you don't get on with Adam or you have a bit of disconnect with Adam, I think he still kind of stands up as a character from my point of view. What do you think, Daniel?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't feel this massive disconnect between the Adam that I see in cutscenes and the way that I've been playing him. I can imagine maybe if I adopted a different style, there could be, but I don't know how the cutscenes change sometimes. Do they change significantly?
No, not really. We tried to write them in a way that they would apply, hopefully, even if you played your character radically different, is that hopefully that they wouldn't feel congruous to you.
That is in itself a huge art.
Yeah.
Of writing, and I think it's a very game-specific art of writing. I think it's something that we're actually coming to terms with now as an industry. Game writers people are understanding what a game writer does and how important it is.
Finally,
tell me about it.
We're still, we still have a long way to go. I've often said that I compare it to the way that game audio was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Is there came that point where suddenly consoles and PCs developed to a level where you could suddenly have a really good operatic theatrical score, and you had proper orchestras doing game music, and you had proper sound effects, and suddenly the oral quality of a game just leapt tenfold. And I think we're there with writing right now, is that people are starting to wake up to the fact that, we don't just have to tack a crappy storyline onto the end of this. We can actually invest and make narrative a part of this from the very beginning, and we can add story and depth and pitch in moment and give, hopefully, players the same kind of experience that they get from reading a book or watching a great movie or a cool TV show.
Good. You were talking about Roland Barthes earlier, Daniel, and there is a distinction, I think, between readable and writable games. Readers' games and writers' games. There's ones like Skyrim, which are essentially writable games, and then ones like, I think Deus Ex is between the two, but then games like, I don't know, Battlefield Bad Company is a completely readable game. You spend a whole time, and both are enjoyable for different. And there's no reason why one or the other of them should be wrong, and we should embrace.
I love Bad Company. I was playing that yesterday night, actually.
Were you?
Yeah.
Actually, we've not talked about how you played Deus Ex.
How I played it?
Yes.
Me personally.
What did you think when you actually played the game through? How did it?
Yeah, it's kind of fun for me because the job I did for the most part in the actual the writing I did in the game that you will see as a player is when you look at the ebooks. Most of those were written by me. When you look at backstory about the characters and factions and a lot of the invisible writing, a lot of that was done by me. And a lot of the core story, the sweet path stuff, the main cutscenes, I wrote pretty much the first draft of almost everything that you saw there.
That's very cool, isn't it?
Those were pretty cool. But I have to say that, I can't take full responsibility for those or full credit for them because it's very much a collaborative thing. Yeah. So, I'd write a draft and some of the others write. So it's a team effort. I didn't write any of the barks. I didn't write any of the second-tier dialogue. I didn't write any of the side quest stuff. So for me, it was kind of a weird thing to do, because on the one hand, I'm playing it and I get to watch a cutscene and I'm like, oh man, that cutscene came out really well. Oh, there's that really cool line I wrote. Oh, that's really great. I'm so pleased that's come out well. And then I go over to talk to a supporting character and I click on them and I have no idea what they're going to say to me. And this character says, okay, can you go over here and do this thing for me? And that side quest is completely new to me.
That's fantastic.
So I was coming at it not only from it in the point of view as a writer engaged and involved in a project, but also as a gamer too. So I was getting two kinds of great thrills out of it. But my play style, I tended to go for what we called the ninja approach. We used to talk about, like, you'd have the ghost approach, which is kind of like leave no traces, leave no bodies kind of thing. Mine was more sort of ninja, which is sneaking around, but if somebody sees you, you know, take them out quick and quietly, and don't be afraid to pull the gun out when it all kicks off. But most of the time try and sneak past with a minimum number of alarms being set off, but not being afraid to beat the hell out of people when the need came down.
So you had Ghost and Ninja. Were there any other ones that you kind of refer to during development?
I can't remember what names we had for them.
There's the all guns blazing approach, obviously.
Yeah, well, we talked about we didn't really have a name for that, but we talked about the kind of like, the run and gun style approach, which the game really isn't designed for.
It doesn't really work. I mean, this is something we had a bit in our feedback as well. People saying, like, I tried to play it like that and it just didn't work. So, and they were using that as some people were using that as an argument for it doesn't offer choice. Mm-hmm. I think there are limits, I think, to Deus Ex's playstyle. You can basically be stealth combat, stealth. There's a few other things, but I think Ramboing it never pretty much works. There's not enough ammo around.
It'd be unrealistic to do the run and gun.
It's not that kind of game.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. I think when people say, a game offers choice, then people seem to assume that it should offer them every choice to do whatever they want. It's like, no, it doesn't necessarily.
You could complain that there's not enough platforming in there or racing sections.
I want to be Adam Jensen, the Formula One car racer in 2027.
Deus Ex kart.
Yes.
Deus Ex kart rating. You heard it here first. That'll be the next one we release.
Definitely do that. That would be great. So yeah, were you were a ninja then?
Yeah, I was going for the kind of ninja approach, mostly because, again, I wanted to sneak and stop and look at everything. Because it was just fun for me to kind of wander around the set, as it were. Stuff I'd seen guys working on in the office, and then actually being in the game and going, oh, cool, there's that thing that he did. And, oh, that's really nice. And this set design that I'd seen pictures of that I hadn't actually got to play in. I was being a real tourist, because I'd run around a level and do kind of all the level-y stuff and think, okay, I just want to stop. And whereas other players would, probably move on, I was actually kind of walking around admiring the scenery and the craft of it, because I knew how hard the guys who worked on it had worked, and I wanted to fully appreciate and say, I was calling them up afterwards going, that thing you did in that level, that came out really well. Nice work, good job, So I kind of came at it that sort of weird two-headed approach, half as a player and half as an involved team member, I guess.
Was there a moment for you that kind of summed up Deus Ex, that a bit that you were playing through that you thought, this is what the game's about?
That's a good question.
I was thinking about that the other night when I was playing through, and I've got a few. Have you got any, Daniel?
It's hard for me to kind of divorce that question from my own personal experience as a writer on it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of moments in it where stuff I wrote or things I came up with or we came up with in the studio, where we went, that's a really cool idea, that will play really, really well. And then seeing it in the game and seeing it executed exactly the way we wanted it, those are the things that kind of stuck in my mind. One of the characters that I really enjoyed coming up with was Eliza Cassan, the news reporter, and the confrontation where you speak to Eliza in the server room, and she does a kind of little move right at the very end where she says to Adam, I want to help you more, but she won't let me, and Adam says who, and she just kind of puts her hand on her shoulder and points. And it was just a really small little moment, but to me I thought that was really cool, because it's kind of weird and ethereal and a bit sort of strange, and that moment reminded me an awful lot of the conversation with Helios that you get in the original game, and it felt very, as we used to say in the office, Deus Exy. A lot of the time, whenever we were working on stuff, we would always say, whenever we were bringing a new element to the table, Jean-Francois Degas, our producer, would always say, "Is this Deus Exy? Does it feel Deus Exy?"
I love that.
And that would be like, we really should have had that written up on a big poster up on the wall. Is it Deus Exy? Because every time we came up with something new, it was like, does this feel like Deus Ex? Because if it doesn't feel like Deus Ex, it doesn't go in. Because we were very, very, very aware of the fact that it was a game that's following this sort of grand tradition of being one of the most lauded titles in gaming history. Whenever anybody talks about great narrative in gaming, Deus Ex is always on that list. It's always in that conversation.
Absolutely. And we were speaking previously about how many people who played Human Revolution played Deus Ex, and from our feedback, it seems that about half of the people who wrote to us have played Deus Ex, but that's obviously IGN's readership. So I'm guessing of everyone who's played it, I think 20-30%,
yeah,
maybe even less.
You said that when we were doing the BBC interview.
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
and I agree with that. I think the 20% figure, I think 20-25% would probably be about a fair assumption that there's that percentage of sort of hardcore old school gamers who played the original game. And it's really nice to see people who are playing Human Revolution going, oh, okay, well maybe I'll go back and pick up Deus Ex on Steam, because it's, it's available on Steam for pennies now. Yeah. And that's
no
really
object
cool.
highlighting in that though.
Yeah, but the thing is it's a it's a very different game, but it's a very similar game.
Do you see them as complementary, or?
Well, they have to be. I mean, they take place in the same universe. I mean, Human Revolution is a sequel, is a prequel to the original Deus Ex. We've got 25 years earlier, I think.
How do you think Human Revolution kind of refracts the experience of the original one if you went back and played it?
You know what? I've been thinking about doing that myself, actually. Now I've played Human Revolution, I was looking at my copy of Deus Ex. I've got the Game of the Year edition I bought back in 2001, and I thought maybe I should. I played it before. When we started work on Human Revolution, we all sat down and said, right, everybody has to play Deus Ex again. And I not only did that, I also played Invisible War. I even went back and played Project Snowblind, which was done by the same team, to steep ourselves in it. And my experience of playing Deus Ex again before we did Human Revolution was one thing, and I think I'd like to play it again now to see how that my perception of that game will change. Because we worked very hard to make sure that there was connective matter, not only thematically in the nature of the gameplay and the style of it, but also narratively. So there are little kind of kisses to history. If you pay close attention to stuff that goes on in the game, and you read emails, you look in ebooks and stuff, you'll see little mentions of things that will pay off later on. And of course, another thing that I worked on is I worked on a tie-in novel, or an original fiction novel that kind of parallels the opening kind of 2 or 3 acts of Human Revolution. And I worked very hard to make sure that connects to the original game. So, if you're a fan of the original, you can pick up the game or the book and go, oh yeah, see, there's a little nod to that. And if you're not, it won't really mean anything to you and you won't lose anything. So it's not kind of like, there's a big continuity reference that you'll trip over and go, well, I don't know who that guy is, so it doesn't mean anything to me.
I'm very much looking forward to reading that after I finish Deus Ex.
Oh, cool.
I've got it sitting on my shelf. I think I want to keep it until after I'm done with Deus Ex. I think going back to moments that define the game for me, it was the first time I managed to get through an area without being seen once. Usually I'm ninja like you. I incapacitate and kill. I methodically incapacitate everybody. But there was one mission in Shanghai in in the lower tier of the medical corporation, whose name I've remembered.
Taiyang Medical.
That's right, yes. In Shanghai. There was a section of that where I managed to get through the whole thing, about 30-40 minutes of hostile area without being seen once, and I just felt like that's this game. That's what they've been trying to get me to do. And I knew that I couldn't do that earlier. The reason I couldn't do it earlier was I just wasn't good enough. And over time, I just kind of learned the patterns of the game, and I'd augmented myself sufficiently. And I actually felt like, if I was Jensen right now, I would be thinking, I have improved myself, and I have, got to the point organically where I can do this. And it just made me feel really connected to Jensen then. I thought cool. that was a cool moment for me.
The first time I ever got the Ghost experience point bonus was actually right at the beginning, when you're going into the Seraph Industries and the terrorists have taken over. And I played through that.
It's the hardest mission for us, wasn't it?
But the funny thing was, is because I'd played that mission 3 or 4 times, because when we were doing the early builds and we were doing the vertical slice, that was the first thing that we did. So that was the one I was most familiar with. So I kind of sailed through it because I knew exactly what to do, and I knew exactly where to go to kind of, put my way through it. And then beyond that point, the whole game starts to open up, and there were bits that were completely new to me. It's funny, as I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is not a game writer at all, but a big hardcore games fan, and he was playing through it at the same time as me, and he said, did you do anything because you had prior knowledge, because of your secret insider knowledge? Were there any things you did differently because you knew stuff was coming up? And funnily enough, I look back at my playstyle, and I think there are only 2 points in the game where, because I knew what was going to happen in the story, I modified my playstyle slightly. Right. But I lost myself in it sufficiently enough that most of the time I was like, oh yeah, I've forgotten that, that this thing was going to come up.
That feeds into something one of our readers actually sent in called Travis Bowditch. I hope I've said that correctly. Says, one of my problems with Deus Ex Human Revolution is the saturated media coverage. it's my own fault, but watching all the videos posted on IGN meant I already knew how to get past the first level, and the only way to save the hostages was to go via the vent, and how to talk the guy out of shooting the woman. It's not hard to spoil stuff for yourself when you're excited about a game, and there's so much given away in the marketing and the press.
That was, I mean, Deus Ex was heavily, obviously for obvious reasons, it was heavily, pushed in the media, and with us, I mean, we saw the game probably about 12 times before it came out. And a few people have written in and said, I actually knew too much about this game. Do you think that affected it? Affected people's experience?
I think, looking back at the trailers, I can remember going through the trailers and thinking like, they're showing a clip from that. That's interesting. Because there were bits in the trailers that were clips from the very end of the game. But the way they were constructed is, I thought, well, everybody watching this trailer, I know that because I worked on the game, but most people won't know that until they actually get there. So I didn't have a problem with that. I mean, I think, it's a difficult line to walk, really, because obviously, you want to build people's interest and you want to stimulate them and you want to thrill them with the idea of playing this game. And it's like, you get the same thing with movies as well. There's always going to be spoilers
trailers.
out there.
You know the beats of all action blockbusters that come out from the trailers already.
How many times have you seen something where the coolest action moment in the kind of the wow moment in the movie, the money shot, and it's right there in the trailer. And then you think, well, are you going to have a better shot than that in the film? Well, probably not, because you put it in the trailer because it is the coolest.
It happened this summer with X-Men First Class. I don't know if you've seen that, but the submarine bit, which is the big climax
where he pulls the submarine out. I saw. That's exactly what I thought.
The end of the movie.
When I saw that, and I thought, well, that's the money shot right there. It looks really cool, but like, I've just seen the edited highlights.
Yeah, because it ties into the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they're on the Bay of Pigs. It's got to be the end of the movie.
Let's be honest, most action movies can be basically edited down to 2 minutes without losing that much of the really important stuff. with games, it's a bit different, I think. But there was a lot of coverage, and there were certainly 2 missions that were ruined for me. I mean, it's press; you kind of expect this anyway. You can't actually avoid it. But there were 2 missions that were kind of ruined for me. What interested me is to see that people, readers who were really looking forward to, also managed to ruin little bits of it for themselves. I really hope, Travis, you enjoyed the rest of the game.
And of course, the fact is that all of the missions are designed to be played in different ways. So there's only that. I think there's that one trailer we put out which showed one particular sequence being played in 3 different ways. But that's only one tiny little part of the entire mission. There's the one we did where I think it says, you see him going past the guy and it's like, well, you can walk up to the guy and stab him in the back. You can cloak and sneak right past him, or you can climb over boxes and find a secret hatch in the roof. But that's one tiny part of a much, much bigger mission.
I didn't realise, on a random aside, I did not realise that you could block doors off with vending machines until quite late on in the game. I had so much fun with that. Just,
I never even tried that.
In one tiny room.
People were telling me that they did that, is that they would kind of block off a corner of a corridor so that the guards couldn't get through to them. And I thought, God, I never even thought of doing that.
Never thought of doing that.
It's great, isn't it? It's wonderful. It's one of these games that you do talk to people about it and you find something out that you didn't already know, which is so rare these days and really appreciable.
As a writer, I guess one of the kind of enticements of writing is you get to control the world. You get to determine what happens in that world. But with a game like Deus Ex, you're giving away some of that control to the player. Is that a conflicting impulse as a writer to give away that control?
Well, I mean, to be honest, as a game writer, you don't get that much control. The thing about writing for games that's different from, say, like writing a novel or writing a movie is that, just say you're writing a film, the project, the concept begins and ends with you. You write your script and you take it to a film director and you go, here's my movie idea. And they go, that's great. And we'll get these actors in and we'll get these people to build the sets and we'll get these people to do all these things. And it all grows out of your concept as a writer. Games don't work that way. No one will play a game because of great writing. And for some writers, that's really a hard lesson to learn. People play games because they want great gameplay. And if you can have great writing on top of that as well, then that's just, that makes it even better. But the thing is a great game starts with a great game concept. So, Deus Ex grows out of the idea of a multiple choice environment and the idea that you can utilize combat and stealth, and you have all these different technological, gadgets and stuff that your character can apply. You could take that basis and write any kind of storyline based spreading out of that. So, as a writer, you come on after the idea has already been conceived. So you don't perhaps have as much control over it. Well, in fact, I'm saying no, you don't have as much control over it as you would if you were writing a novel where every single element of the game is, comes out of your mind. With games writing, it's much more a collaborative experience because you're working with level designers, you're working with art guys, you're working with, game programmers, you're working with people who have, a different kind of technology that they're bringing in. You might have someone approach you and say, okay, well, we've got a game that can do this thing, and we want a story that will dovetail nicely with that. So that's kind of the game writer experience.
You're kind of reverse engineering.
Yeah, in a way, and it's a very different challenge. And for some writers, guys who come in from different disciplines find that very hard to understand. I've spoken to lots of non-game writers who say, wow, games look really cool. I love playing games. I'd love to, write a game. I've got this great idea for a game. And I always say, no one cares. And that's the sad truth. It really is if you're a writer and you want to write games and you go into a game studio and go, I have a great idea for a game. And they're like, yeah, so does everybody else in this building. We don't want your ideas. We want your talent as a writer. Here's the game we're going to produce. We want you to come and put a good story on this. We don't want you to come to us with an idea for a game. It's a very different sort of way of working, but it's a different challenge, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, because sometimes I guess those limitations lead to inspiration.
Absolutely. When someone gives you a box to work in, some people will find that restrictive. Me, I love that because I think, okay, if this is the environment I have to tell a story in, I take that as a challenge, and I look at the kind of the corners of the envelope and say, well, how can I push that without breaking it? How can you do interesting things within this, colouring inside the lines and still make it cool? And that's a lot of fun.
Well, that's what many writers say about genres.
Yeah, quite, yeah. Cool.
It's no different from someone saying, okay, you've got to write a one-act theatre play with 2 actors.
Yeah. I quite like, I'm a journalist, so but I quite like briefs. Quite like being given a box to work in. Yeah,
because there's no kind of, really and truly, in any writing medium, there's no total freedom. There's always stuff that's going to hem you in. With games, those kind of walls are a lot more strongly delineated. But I love it. I love the challenge of it. I'm really enthused by being involved in the games industry right now because we're at a fantastic period. I've said this before, is games writing is kind of occupying the same space that TV writing did when television was first taking off. Is you had this point when creative writers were people who were writing for entertainment medium at that time, were writing for radio and they were writing for film. And then TV comes along and there's this mass migration of radio writers to television because it was a completely new way of telling story. As it wasn't like film and it wasn't like radio, and there was a completely new language to be learned and a completely new way of delivering narrative through, half hour, an hour long TV shows. And we're in exactly the same place now with game writing, because game writing is a new way to tell story, it's a new way to deliver narrative. And there are no maps for these territories. We haven't decided how to do this yet. We're still learning. And because the industry moves so quickly and technology's advancing and there's new platforms, there's new ways of telling story, and being kind of in the boat on top of that wave is really exciting because it's like, wow, what new cool stuff are we going to get to do? And, it's a challenge and it's fun and it's a little bit scary, but, it's really cool to be a part of it. And I'm glad to be a part of something like Deus Ex, which is, as I said earlier, is a title that respects and understands story and really wanted to kind of push it forward.
Cool. I think that's a good place to wrap up, isn't it? So that's the last in this series of extended play. Inaugural series of extended play. But we will be obviously playing something new very soon indeed.
So join us then.
Yeah. Would you like to send your suggestions? Actually, that would be good. If you could tell us what you'd like to play next as a group.
Send any suggestions for what game we should cover next to extendedplay@ign.com.
You should follow us on Twitter as well at IGNUK, and you can follow us individually. Why not? James?
I'm on Twitter at JMSwallow.
I am at Daniel Kruger.
And I am imaginatively at Kazan McDonald.
You don't really have interesting Twitter names.
No, we should
we'll
work
try
on
to be fascinating and funny.
Yes. In 140 characters.
Indeed. Thank you very much for being with us for this first series of extended play. We hope it carries on for many more.
Thank you.
Legends. Long have legends inspired people the world over. For in legends, we see the worlds of the impossible unfold before us.
Heroic quests, horrific monsters, gods, magic, tales of the valiant and the villainous. But more than that, in legend, we see ourselves reflected in the stories we tell.
I'm William Stark.
And I'm Omar Timsaw.
And we are D&D Legends and Lore. Join us as we explore the fantastic lore of the world's most popular tabletop RPG. Suddenly, a beam of radiant light pierces the haze. Then, a powerful angel streaks down from above. She is pure beauty, fury, and zeal.
Arashni, Your sentence has been spoken by the Sildarine. For what you have done, you are declared demon. Be what you are, and go where you must. You can find D&D Legends and Lore on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts can be found.
Hey folks, we're the hosts of Comic Sans, the podcast about comics for those who are sans knowledge. I'm Yen, a reader, writer, liver, and breather of comic books.
And I'm Nat. I used to know absolutely nothing about comics, but now...
So actually, I've got a quiz for you.
I still have a lot to learn about comics.
Thank you. On Comic Sans, I make Nat read some of my favorite works in the medium, including Saga, Daredevil, and the Flintstones.
And Yen talks about what makes that comic special. Sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's...
Paneling, gutters, page turns, colorings, lettering, semiotics, juxtaposition.
Okay, Professor, save it for the episodes.
You can listen to Comic Sans on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You can binge our first 2 seasons. That's over 20 episodes on 20 different comics.
And we just launched Season 3, new episodes every 2 weeks.